another minute to get you dropped in the Wolfer platform.
Okay, will you tell us when we should start the interview, Sid?
Yes, I will totally tell you.
Okay. So that's hilarious. So is everything out now?
No, I had to, the minimum order was 250. So I have my whole office smells like lavender.
I love lavender. That's a good smell.
I'll send you a little care package. I have tons of product that we just did kind of a fun. I don't know.
You guys are good to go. You're officially
I'm a fan. Hey everybody, welcome to Wolfer Live TV. It's me, Hillary Richard, and today I have the luck to interview Heather Cabot, who has a new book that's just been released. It's called The New Chardonnay, The Unlikely Story of How Marijuana Went Mainstream. It's great. I read it over the weekend and today. Loved it. So Heather, for those of you who don't know, is an award-winning journalist, former ABC News anchor, and you also authored another book, right, about girls in tech, is that?
Yes, co-authored another book. It's called Geek Girl Rising, Inside the Sisterhood Shaking Up Tech, yes.
So there's no weed in your background. I mean,
no.
I'm wondering what inspired you to write about cannabis?
Well, honestly, there's a few things. And by the way, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I love this topic, so I'm happy.
Oh, yay. So I grew up in the 80s. I grew up in the Just Say No generation. And so, marijuana subculture was just really not part of my world. It wasn't anything that I really had paid attention to into adulthood. And I kind of noticed about 3 years ago, though, that it seemed to be everywhere. Whether it was, an article in Oprah magazine about women having a THC infused tea party, or Martha Stewart on television with Snoop Dogg, or, just sort of all of these unlikely places that I just never, it puzzled me. At the same time, I was, as you mentioned earlier, I had co-written this other book that was about the sisterhood of Silicon Valley. And one of the chapters in that book really looks at women who are supporting women-led tech startups. It's a whole chapter about female angel investors and venture capitalists. And so I was part of that network through my research, and I had done some of my own angel investing actually in addition. And I noticed that some of those women were starting to back cannabis companies. And I have to tell you, I was kind of shocked, because these were women that I just regarded as very straight-laced. They had these Wall Street backgrounds and Ivy League degrees and the whole thing. And it just really struck me as surprising. And so I started making some calls, because I just wanted to know what the deal was. Like, why would they get involved with something federally illegal?
Right.
And ultimately,
we all ask ourselves the same question pretty much.
And so, so I started making some calls, and ultimately it came down to a conversation I had with a woman named Jean Sullivan, who is a very early investor, in software as a service. And she ended up becoming an investor in cannabis. And she always says, I went from sass to grass. That's her line that she always says. And I said, Jean, what is this all about? And she said, I can't explain this to you in a single phone call. She said, if you are really interested in this topic, you need to go to the Marijuana Business Convention in Vegas this fall, get yourself a ticket, and just go for the week and meet all of these different people, walk the expo floor, see how big and how professional this industry is. It's totally going to blow your mind. It's not anything that you think it would be. And that's what I did.
What year was that?
It was the fall of 2017.
So had Vegas legalized yet? Had Nevada?
Yes, but this is not a consumption event. So that's number one. Right. So of course, like you, I'm making this assumption that, it's going to be, I don't know, like a scene out of Weeds, where people
There's gonna be a cloud of smoke.
Right. And people are sampling, products. No, this is about the industry. So this is about like big farm equipment and indoor lights and packaging and accountants and attorneys and, kind of the unsexy stuff of selling this product. And it literally was at the Las Vegas Convention Center,
huge.
It's massive. The year that I went, it's now over 28,000 people. I went again in 2018. It continues to grow exponentially. But what I noticed when I went there is, again, not a consumption event. the people look like people that I met in Silicon Valley. You know,
Right.
it was these white guys and, sport coats and sweater vests with their laptops and legal
Right.
pads and handing out business cards. And it was like any other trade show I had ever been to. And then I started meeting some of the actual, entrepreneurs and investors and getting to know them. And I just found them completely fascinating. And
Well,
it,
certainly
yeah,
the four that you profile in your book, which I love the format. So
thank
basically,
you.
listeners, what Heather does is she takes four entrepreneurs, of course, the most fabulous being Snoop Dogg and his partner. What was his name? Ted Chung?
Ted Chung. Yeah.
His business partner. As they venture in from personal weed consumption to business, and then there was the Willy Wonka of weed from Canada. That was a pretty catchy name, and two others, including a woman. And one interesting statistic I've read is that there's a much larger number of female executives in the marijuana industry than there is in basically any other major industry in the United
Well,
States.
certainly more than like finance and tech, absolutely. But I think if you look more closely at the industry and how it's evolved, you'll see that while there are a number of female executives, there aren't that many that are actually on corporate boards.
Right.
And there are certainly very few that actually own the actual business licenses.
With the
And that's
exception, yeah.
with the exception of Beth Stavola, who's one of the main characters in the book. And that's why I chose her,
Right.
because she was such a pioneer in that sense. And the industry, when you look at sort of the ownership of these actual businesses, it is incredibly dominated by white men.
Which and it's white, even when it's female, it's white, and which is
Yeah.
obviously a huge problem that I want to talk to you about a little
Yeah.
further down. But the main thesis of your book is really about the rebranding. So
Yes.
marijuana went from like, somebody selling you a loose joint or a baggie on the street, or, maybe your dealer was like some zoned out stoner. You'd go to the apartment and you would go through a puff of weed smoke, to like Main Street looking like an Apple store, sleek, beautifully packaged, designed, I think, to appeal to people who maybe weren't smoking pot in the way that some of us were in their teens, and certainly more to women than would ordinarily, I think, be consumers. So what sparked the rebranding?
Well, I think it was a variety of things. I mean, as I delve into the book, one of the biggest things that sparked the rebranding was data and the consumer insights. Again, not super sexy, but like really essential to business. So, ultimately, as I sort of talk about in the book, I give one example of this company called Weed, which is really a software company that created a platform for delivery in California. And because they were gathering this data through e-commerce, they had set up a site that, again, was supposed to appeal to the mainstream. It's like blue and white, there's no green, there's no, no marijuana leaves on it. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was, the whole idea was they wanted it to look like Amazon. They wanted it to look very accessible, and clean and beautiful. But what they were able to do in the very early days when this company launched is they were able to actually look at the demographics of when people were in a position where they didn't have to walk into that dispensary, or even, and which of course that's a barrier for a lot of people. Even now, a lot of people don't feel comfortable publicly walking in. It's been interesting during COVID. A lot of these businesses have actually shifted to a delivery and a curbside pickup model, and they've actually seen
is up,
and consumption is up. And one of the reasons is because it's discreet.
Right.
And so, but what this company was able to do by gathering these consumer insights is they were actually able to, for the first time ever, to really have a line of sight into who was buying, why were they buying it, when were they buying it, how were the shopping habits different in Northern California versus Southern California, I mean, all these kinds of things. And one of the things that they were able to show in the early days, and that I talk about in the book, is that people were very surprised that there were women and there were moms and there were seniors who, again, once they didn't have to actually like find a dispensary and actually walk in, but they could choose from an e-commerce marketplace, it suddenly opened up a whole new group of consumers. And why I write about it in the book is that Snoop and Ted initially in their research had thought, anecdotally, that women might be this future consumer to seize on, but they didn't really know until companies like Ease started actually looking into the data.
Right.
It's funny, most of the people from Ease came from Silicon Valley. I mean, it was like the first Silicon Valley sort of cannabis startup, which is interesting, and they really brought that mindset to it.
Yeah.
So
let's talk about women and edibles, because edibles is like a topic very dear to my heart and stomach.
Oh, okay.
Brain, arguably. So I read a statistic in your book that said I think it was 2016, that of the legal, the recreational marijuana that was sold, only 15% of it was edibles, which you counted as candy, or somebody counted as candy and beverages.
Right.
Now,
right.
every woman I know basically eats edibles. I mean, I had foot surgery in January. I broke my shoulder in July. I can't tell you how many people came over and gave me edibles, which was incredibly thoughtful. But I did a little research and I saw that only 2 years later, so the last figure I saw was for 2018, 44% of recreational marijuana sales were candies. 17% were tinctures. So like actual bud, which I think men smoke much more than women, went from like 85% down to 39%. So what's that about?
Well, I think there's a couple of things happening. First of all, this is a very new industry in terms of the legal side of things. So when you look at those statistics, you have to look more closely at, are we talking about people who are consuming based on legal channels? Are they buying it through the dispensary channel, or are you including people who are getting it from the illicit market? Because that's
these statistics are the legal market.
Okay. So, and the other thing you have to look at is state by state. That's the other thing that's really important here. So there's a bunch of different things here. I think, first of all, the product innovation has accelerated incredibly since 2012. And, we track some of that in the book, and we talk specifically in the book about beverages and, the challenges of creating a beverage that not only tastes good, but also is predictable. And I think that is probably the biggest thing that people are looking for right now. For your viewers who may not understand about, these types of consumables, the onset time can be an hour to 2 hours. And oftentimes what happens if they are not labeled well, or if people are buying them from unregulated sources where there is no labeling or dosing that's on the package, they may take too much. They may consume some and, I don't feel anything yet, and then they take more, and then it's too much.
Right, you're like Maureen Dowd. You just eat the entire freaking block of chocolate without reading the package.
But you know what's so crazy about that particular story, and that incident with Maureen Dowd actually led the state of Colorado to really look more closely at the packaging and there were a lot of missteps in the early days, because I think the biggest problem, if you talk to anybody in the industry, they'll tell you it's education. These are really new products. Yes, they've been around for thousands of years, but what's been around for thousands of years is the flower and smoking the flower, not all of these different types of derivative products, which really are, you have to know how to use them, and you have to understand dosing. You have to understand how it affects what else you've eaten that day, and all of these other things. But you're hitting on something, which is what I think a lot of these companies have recognized, is that two things. One, women in general are more interested in discrete products. We've definitely seen that. If you look at some of the retail data over the course of the pandemic, women are very much interested in discretion. That certainly drives purchasing. And then the other part of it is also the fact that women are not necessarily interested in sort of that old stereotype of getting like totally stoned out of your mind. Women are multitasking.
We want to take the edge off. We want like your new Chardonnay. We don't want to have a glass of Chardonnay.
Women are not interested in being couch locked, not interested in not being functional. And so a lot of these new emerging brands are really focusing on something called microdosing, which right
to the choir.
Right. So it's this idea of something that could almost mimic the way you feel after one glass of wine, and so it's something where you can let your hair down, but you don't have to be worried that, you're going to feel out of control. Like I will be quite honest with you. I'm not a big drinker, and I'm really not a cannabis consumer either. But to someone like me, I think the appeal, and I think these brands are also trying to appeal to this group of people who are interested in better sleep,
Oh, yes. No
reducing stress,
Right.
right? Pain, dealing with pain management. So I think there's a lot of like lifestyle things, that what the really smart brands were able to sort of seize on the whole wellness trend that's out there, and self-care, and also on this idea that women want discretion, and all these things together, and to package it really beautifully. I think that's what you're going to continue to see. And
Some
it,
of this stuff, some of this stuff is gorgeous. Like those Bebo pens.
Yeah.
They look like a high-end, like $250 makeup applicator.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just actually last week I met this really interesting entrepreneur who actually was one of the original executives at iVillage, and her company is called Her Highness. Her Highness.
That is brilliant. I love it.
but they're really trying to market to people like themselves, and the products that they have are they're beautiful, that they're fun, and they even have things that I think are really practical. Like, I haven't tried this yet, but they actually came up with a CBD. It's like an insert for a high heel to put on the ball of your foot.
Wow.
To wear. I haven't tried it yet.
Doesn't it
sound amazing? I mean, not that we're wearing high heels lately in COVID, but
I'm not wearing them, period. But
it's smart, right? It's so smart.
So here's the one thing I find tricky about this legal industry, because I'm all in favor of it. I mean, I think it's ridiculous that people can buy alcohol, which I think is much more dangerous for you than legal marijuana products. And I mean, I don't know a lot of people who are driving and smashing their cars and stuff because they've eaten a half a gummy or something. But in any event, that's my personal opinion. But I know that in 2017, I think you wrote in your book, it was like a $9 billion industry, legal cannabis. And I read elsewhere that by 2025, it's predicted to be a $23 billion industry. Now I say, yay, great, good place to get tax revenue, because that the black market industry is going on. And until you legalize it, obviously none of that money really flows back into the state or coffers. Maybe at some point it'll go into the federal coffers. But where does this leave people of color who have been incarcerated and convicted at much higher rates proportionally than their white counterparts? And obviously a felony conviction renders you unable to really to work in a lot of places, really unable to participate in the marijuana business,
right? Or or many other businesses, a felony conviction on your record, even getting housing, getting getting any job,
getting public benefits. It's a real
problem.
So that really rankles me, and I'm wondering what do you see as the solution to that?
Well, look, I think it's certainly, and I definitely write about this in the book. I mean, I think it is, it's an injustice. It's an injustice. I think that the way the industry evolved from 2012 to the present, I think you've seen as each state has legalized, in particular, adult use, where they've completely lifted the prohibition, and not sort of separated into just a medical program. I think they've really tried hard to figure this out. It is complex. I think that, just to give you an example, when Colorado passed its program in 2012 and amended its constitution to legalize adult use, they did not address the issue of clearing people's records. That was not part. And I mean, can you imagine that? So you had people who were setting up these, hugely lucrative businesses, in some cases
still in jail.
Well, people or had these records. In addition, the state until this summer, literally until this summer, the legislature just passed social equity legislation in Colorado to address this, to clear records, and also to create some set-asides and resources for people who have been disenfranchised or have been disproportionately targeted by the war on drugs to be able to get into the industry. Now, I'm certainly heartened by that. I think the fact is that there are many other things that need to happen. One of the big things is banking reform, which I know, again, not sexy. I tend to be a little bit of a policy wonk, but I'll be honest with you.
Banking reform.
The thing about most people don't understand is most of these legal businesses, number one, they're still cash businesses, financial institutions.
They can't get bank loans.
They can't get loans. So who do you think
accounts can get frozen? Yeah,
exactly. Now, who do you think that affects the most?
Of course, people of color,
It affects and women and veterans and people who don't have this wealthy network of friends to get them to invest in their cannabis businesses. And that, again, that's sort of why I chose the people that I chose to highlight in the book, because I really wanted people to understand the amount of capital that it takes to even get into this industry. The key is ownership here, right? The key is ownership. It's great to be an executive in a company, but when we're talking about creating generational wealth at the dawn of an industry, we're talking about equity. We're talking about ownership of these businesses, and many of those groups have been cut out. The last point I'll just say on this issue is, if you live in New York, if you live in other states that are starting to address this issue, those are the issues you want to watch. You want to see how they're going to deal with expungement, how they're going to deal with giving these other people who want to apply for these licenses a leg up. How are they going to prioritize those groups? Other states are trying to do it. I mean, California wrote it into their law. They've had a lot of problems with it. Massachusetts as well.
It's very uneven. Some of the expungement statutes really only address very lower level offenses, and often you have to apply for them. It's not made simple.
No, I mean, I'm actually working on a story right now, profiling this group called Code for America, which is a civic nonprofit organization of software engineers. And the problem was such an issue in California and they were on deadline to clear about 200,000 convictions, that the state actually brought in this organization and asked them to work with local district attorneys' offices to help them create algorithms to try to surface these convictions so they could figure out whose records should get cleared. And then on top of it, how do you notify these people?
Yeah.
So these are
knows where they are. Yeah.
Exactly. These are not easy things in practice. And I think, again, I mean, I say that because I absolutely agree with you 100%. I mean, this is hypocrisy and it needs to be addressed. But people also need to understand as citizens that these are really complex problems. And it's not like you flip a switch and like it's legal and but people need to understand that lives have been devastated by this. And it's going to take some really deliberate, thoughtful action. Just last thing on that point, it was just announced in the last day or so that the House is going to take up the MORE Act.
I saw that. Yes. I saw that. So supposedly it's going to go to the floor in September.
Yes, it already passed. Yeah, right. It came passed out of the Judiciary Committee last fall. Interestingly enough, the Safe Banking Act, which addresses some of these banking reforms I'm talking to you about, actually was already voted on by the House and passed, and it's kind of stuck in this latest stimulus package that's been in limbo. The MORE Act, would deschedule cannabis. It would start to address some of these expungement issues. The problem is it really going to get to the Senate? Like, is McConnell going to take it up? Most people are
McConnell is not in favor of deschedulizing or legalizing, certainly, marijuana, right? He was very instrumental in hemp, which gave us CBD. Thank you for that, Mitch McConnell. Probably the only thing we could thank you for. But I think, it's interesting because I was going to say, you mentioned New York, and one of the things I wanted to talk about is, where are we going? So like 47 out of 50 states now have some level of medical marijuana, right? Mm-hmm. I think it's 11 states and the District of Columbia have recreational. Mm-hmm. What the hell, New York? This is the largest black market in the country. We're facing a huge budget crisis, certainly post-COVID. When on earth are we going to legalize marijuana?
Well, I think they got very close about a year ago, as did New Jersey. But if you go back and look, what really held things up was they could not build consensus on these social justice things that we're talking about. Right. And so I believe it will be taken up again by the legislature. Again, I think the governor has already signaled that he wants to get back to this. Obviously, COVID.
Thanks to Cynthia Nixon.
but yes,
Right.
which we talk about in the book. But again, that's why I said, it's important for people to keep an eye on the debate around social justice, because it's complicated in terms of how, how you make sure that it's done fairly, how you
Right.
make sure that it's done in a way that actually benefits the actual people that need to have the benefit, as opposed to big companies coming in and being able to game the system.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I look, I think, New Jersey most likely, what I'm hearing now, New Jersey most likely is going to pass. So it's on the ballot in New Jersey now.
Yeah.
If it passes in New Jersey, that's just going to be an impetus for New York to just get it done. And then the governor of Pennsylvania last week said that he believes that legalizing adult use in his state will help boost economic recovery. So
right. We're all looking at like a total economic crisis. I mean, New York's going to have a huge budget shortfall.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know what we're waiting for, but I do think, I mean, I'm interested to know whether you think the More Act really has a chance. I mean, one of the issues I think is, we're about to face a national election. We're on the cusp of a national election. I know that Biden is in favor of decriminalizing and
Right, not
he's in
legalization.
favor of expunging, but he's not in favor of legalizing adult use marijuana. So
Right.
that will put certainly, the Senate in a difficult position, even the Democrats, I think. But I feel like, and I'm wondering if you agree, like until the federal government decriminalizes it, takes it off of Schedule 1, allows research, so we really can better understand like, what does it do to our brains?
Yeah.
It's not well researched because of the prohibitions based on its classification as a Schedule 1 drug, which is absurd because Schedule 1 means there's no medical benefits. I think that's been disproven over and over again. But, what are your thoughts on this? Do you really think we're going to get anywhere until we have federal relief?
I think that, again, going back to the unsexy banking reform, I think if some of those banking provisions are actually passed, and if banks are allowed to get involved without fear of retribution, and if more investors can feel comfortable that they can invest in these businesses without penalty, I think that this momentum is there in terms of the states. The states have set it up, and frankly, there's sort of a disincentive for the federal government to get involved. Many people don't realize that legal cannabis businesses are subject to a part of the tax code called 280E, which essentially, it basically, just to boil it down, I mean, they can't write up most of their business expenses. So
I know.
they're
I
paying.
saw that in your book. That's outrageous.
So they're paying huge taxes to the federal government, but they're federally illegal. So there's sort of a disincentive there for the federal government to then say, well, I mean, they'll have to, again, it's very complicated. And I feel like my sense is that, I mean, even seeing it, it's interesting. Like the time that I was writing my book, the big trend in the cannabis industry was consolidation, and these companies that were snapping up other companies and basically trying to build these massive multi-state organizations, which, it's very hard to do because you have to operate locally. Every state is totally different. You can't have a national supply chain. You can't build national advertising. I mean, it's very hard. Every single state is totally different. And so what they're seeing now, after sort of the pot bubble kind of, burst before COVID, was that the companies that actually are doing better now are the ones that are more regional and the ones that, have fewer licenses and are not spread so thin. So that's kind of interesting. So I don't know, I would, if I had to bet, I would say, just given the fact that there's a conflict within the Democratic Party about what's going to happen, who knows, I just read something today like that, who knows, maybe like, Trump will decide that like, marijuana will help him win. And then like, maybe like, I don't know. I mean, honestly, we're living in such a weird time that I feel like anything can happen. But I would say, barring something really crazy like that happening, I think that we're going to have a few more years where states are continuing to exercise their rights and create their own programs. And I think at least for right now. But look, we're living in a weird time right now. So I don't have any inside information. I'm just telling you based on like the things that I read. I think it's going to be. I think anybody that's betting that suddenly, prohibition is going to end in the next, 6 months. I think
I wouldn't take that bet.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't, also because the fact, like I said before, like it is historic that the whole House is going to take up the MORE Act, but it's going to get stalled in the Senate,
Yeah,
most likely.
think
It's not,
you're right.
it will not, yeah. So
I think you're right. Although I look forward, honestly, to a day when people are no longer stigmatized or, can have their records expunged. And to me, it's so crazy that you could be a felon for marijuana.
Well, as I read in the book, we're moving, 2/3 of Americans today are in favor of legalization,
Right.
and it's never been higher. And I think that's only going to continue. So I just, it may not, I mean, when I was writing the book, people were like, oh, 2020, it'll 2021, it'll be, things take a lot longer. It takes a long time to change behaviors and attitudes, but I think the momentum is there.
Yeah.
So,
well, Heather, it's a great book. I hope everyone reads it. I mean, you really
Thank you.
made it sort of have a lot of novel qualities that I personally.
That's what I was going for.
Yeah.
Just if
Yeah.
I wanted to write a page turner. I mean, I didn't have any, I'll just say, I did not have any agenda. I still don't. I really wanted to come in as a voyeur. I wanted my audience to make up their own minds about all this. But what I did want to do was take a very complicated topic and a controversial topic and make it entertaining and make it fun.
Well, you succeeded. And of course,
Thank
I think
you.
anyone who reads it is going to want to know whether the Willy Wonka weed lands on his feet. So you might have to save that for your sequel.
Yeah.
But Heather, thanks so much for joining us. It was lovely
Thank you for
talking
having
to
me.
you. And I really enjoyed the book. Everyone, the new Chardonnay,
I'll hold it up.
available. Oh, yes, see, I didn't have a hard copy. Otherwise, I would have held it up. I read it in digital.
Hold it up.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Okay, well, take care. And